I hate writing intros, so let's just get the basics out of the way and get this show on the road. It's been 2020 for 4 years now, and once again, we've had a great lineup of anime to distract us from this fact. After struggling with some of the choices, I slapped together my top 15 anime of this year. Keep in mind, this list only consists of anime from the year 2023, no fall 2022 goofy bullshit. Crunchyroll. This list only contains anime I watched, and I also did not include movies or specials. So, Bunny Girl Senpai's new film, Fate Strange Fake, Attack on Titan, etc. will not appear on this list. This following is a list of things I did not watch, including, but not limited to, even if I did watch an anime and it didn't make this list, it doesn't mean I think it's bad, it just didn't make my top cut. And so with that out of the way, let's get started. I got to give a lot of credit to Buddy Daddies as an original anime. I think a lot of people saw the premise and just immediately assumed that it was going to be a Spy Family clone, but pretty quickly it carved out its own identity. The anime takes itself much more seriously, and while there's definitely comedy in the show, it isn't the focus. I mean, the entire reason the main characters even end up with a kid is because they kill her dad on a hit mission. Long story, and because of domino effect of events, they end up taking her in. There's no greater purpose that they specifically need to work towards, but they have to find a proper balance in leading a dangerous lifestyle that already took the life of Kazuki's late wife, while also learning to raise a kid together in the process. Production quality is also solid, with PA Works being the lead studio for the project. They always seem to be doing some kind of original anime, and while not all of them are the peak of fiction by any means, I can appreciate the dedication to the idea of originals and the way that they always come up with something generally interesting to watch. I didn't know how I'd feel about this anime at first, and I'm happy that it ended up the way that it was. If I had to nitpick anything about it, I'd probably say that the ending felt maybe a bit too convenient, but such is the struggle of an original anime trying to fit episode constraints. It doesn't overstay its welcome though, and the themes that the anime handles, despite its colorful exterior, are ones that I'm sure anyone who watches anime would find enjoyable to explore. It won't blow your socks off by any means, but Buddy Daddies is a very solid piece of media, hence why it made the list. There were multiple anime this year that I thought I was going to end up not liking, only to really enjoy them in the end, and this is one of them. After the first episode, I had completely given up on Ichikawa as the main character. It was certainly a unique way to start a romance series, but I was already dreading the coming episodes. Fast forward like 3 episodes later, and his little murder fetish thing he had going on just kind of goes away. I don't know if the author realized early on that perhaps having a demon creature as a main character wasn't really going to appeal to a lot of people, or if this was just always the plan, but regardless of why, Ichikawa changed and the series got dramatically better as a result. As his shyness to those around him started to break away, the character interactions got much more enjoyable to sit through, and the clashing personalities of the two leads was entertaining as well. There were some good interactions to be had with some of the side characters as well, though I'd probably dropkick the class goons if I had met them in real life, because they were pretty damn annoying, but I'm glad this anime ended up actually being really good, because it's a favorite series of a friend of mine, and if it continued like it did in the first few episodes, I was going to have to stage an intervention. Here we are now though, with the second part probably airing by the time I post this video, and now that I'm reading the script, yeah, it's aired. And I'm actually excited to get back into it and see where the characters go from here. Despite being another loner who gets the popular girl type of anime, it does end up feeling pretty refreshing as the progress made between the two is pretty consistent as Ichikawa gets much more comfortable with the people around him. The Magical Revolution, actually, you know what, no, fuck that, I'm not saying all that. Y'all can read, I hope. Magirevo wasn't really on my radar to be something that was actually going to end up being good. Not that long titles automatically equal a bad anime, like some people might think. I mean, just look at my favorite all-time anime. Chairs probably start floating anytime someone says the full thing. Isekai is a writing trope that absolutely plagues the light novel world, but despite that, there are plenty of good stories that can come from them, and Magirevo fits that bill. Really, the isekai part is basically something that sits so far in the background you almost forget that it's even a thing. It's offhandedly mentioned in episode 1 and isn't brought up again until the finale, and even then it was brief. Instead of some power fantasy garbage, we get a gripping character drama with actual consequences for not only those involved, but also for the kingdom the story is set in. The production quality is consistent throughout, making for, in turn, a consistent viewing experience. A lot of the anime tends to focus on the drama, though there's also some pretty strong action sequences as well. They aren't usually very long, but the use of colors during the fights is what particularly stands out. Makes for a bit of eye candy as you get the rare, flashy moments that really signify that the climax is occurring for whatever arc you happen to be in. Another standout thing that Magirevo does, actually being a Yuri anime. The Yuri tag has lost all meaning throughout the years, as it's usually not Yuri 95% of the time, but this series actually has the balls to go through it instead of just teasing. The way in which it happens as well is satisfying because of the culmination of character growth. Real character development is starting as the bottom and ending as the top. I should delete that sentence, but you know what, I said it already, so fuck it, whatever, we ball. This is a show I had no idea what I was really in for. It was either going to be great or absolutely awful, and if you saw my video on this anime a few weeks after it came out, and the fact that it's on my top 15 list, you know that I absolutely love it. After the first season, I immediately went to read the manga, and I'm really excited for the second cour whenever that happens. 100 Girlfriends is what an adaptation should be, something that understands the source it's covering and not only puts it in motion, but adding to it and making any changes for the good of the material. Comedy is subjective, of course, so I can't say that the series is for everyone, but I think there is a bit of something for everyone tucked in there somewhere. Whether you think this is a harem parody or harem in its ultimate form, it's just really endearing overall. The characters are all likable, and despite being a gag comedy at heart, the anime isn't afraid to hit on the emotional beats either. From both the anime and especially after catching up to the manga, you'd actually be pretty surprised by the strength of some of the character writing and the more serious moments. Despite moving at a pace of about 2 chapters an episode, 100 Girlfriends always has something going on to keep you engaged, and that's because it effectively takes advantage of its ever-growing cast. Apart from the emotional moments surprising me, I was also surprised by how effectively the author manages to incorporate all the characters in the series to make sure that none of them are being forgotten to time. And while the anime is in its early stages, it does a good job of maneuvering the characters from within the confines of their archetypes around for the duration of an episode. I also appreciate how it handles the girlfriends as a whole. While there is a lot of swooning for Rentaro, understandably so, they also interact with each other on a pretty consistent basis, forming friendships with each other instead of just being objects for the series progression. Continuing the romance anime train on this list, Insomniacs After School can only be described as a vibe. What initially drew me to the show was the relatability of having trouble sleeping, but the interactions between characters, and also the fact that I don't drop shows, is what got me to stay. There's nothing quite like an anime that uses more niche topics as a vehicle for its story. In the fall season, we had Stardust Telepath, which didn't make this list, but involved a model rocket launching club. In this anime, though, we had a romance that budded through the night sky as the anime runs its story through the astronomy club. Nakami and Maguri probably had some of my favorite chemistry between characters this year, and I was immediately invested in their relationship. Learning about cameras and nighttime sky photography was pretty interesting, but it sets the anime up nicely for some really great moments of cinematography as the stars make the scene shine. The reasons for both characters' insomnia is also something that I found interesting. To begin with, they were already pretty opposite personalities, with Nakami being much more reserved while Maguri was pretty open, but Nakami being afraid of tomorrow coming while Maguri is afraid of not seeing tomorrow just goes to show that there are so many different ways for people to end up in the same boat, even if they come from different walks of life. I don't think there's really any one thing that the series does that it particularly excels at, mainly coming off as more of a jack of all trades that keeps you hooked with the consistency behind what makes it intriguing to begin with. It's also a plus to actually see romance develop in a romance anime, something that we have to cherish whenever it actually happens. This anime might not reinvent the wheel by any means, but it definitely deserves to be here and talked about by way more people. This one might ruffle some feathers, but yes, Onimai is in my top 10 anime of the year. Once again, this was an anime that I pretty much assumed I was going to dislike from the get-go, but decided to try it out because I usually try out one trashy show a season just for parity's sake. In the end though, Onimai ended up being one of my favorite anime from the winter season, and as you can see once again, one of my favorites of the year. Not that the anime isn't without its weird moments, but it's not anything like you'd expect from the way that some people talk about it. I already talked a fair amount about Onimai in my video on the show, so I'll try not to do too much repeating here. If you want my full thoughts, it's best to go watch that after you finish this video, wink wink. There's honestly a lot to take from Onimai as a whole. The main thing I locked in on during my full video on it was the strength of the character writing. Mahiro is an interesting protagonist to watch change, as they are set up as the typical degenerate that changes for the better, but to be honest, they really do feel like someone who might be into some very otaku things, but overall is actually pretty normal. It's still a redemption story about finding and loving yourself, but it's actually much more grounded in reality outside of the premise being as outlandish as it is. I believe characters to be the most important thing in a story, so with Mahiro at the helm of Onimai, it was always in good hands. At the start of the series, you can see how reluctant they are to partake in this shenanigan for Mihari, but over the episodes, Mahiro grows to be more comfortable with himself and starts to frequently change clothing and hairstyles. Doesn't hurt to have strong side characters as well, as Mihari shines the most on that stage, while the others that regularly appear are also fun to watch interact. Another strong suit of Onimai was the production being as good as it was. We had to sacrifice Mushoku Tensei Season 2, more on that later, to some degree to achieve this, but the animation and overall art style for Onimai is pretty spectacular, and you can tell a lot of love was put into this project. It was one of my biggest surprises for this year, and I implore anyone watching this to at least give it a chance if you like these type of shows, but were more on the fence about this. It's well worth at least a try, despite any controversy surrounding it. I just made a video about this one last month, which bombed to my dismay, but once again, I am here to say that Undead Unluck is super underrated and deserves your watch time. Out of all the battle shonen I've watched, this is probably the one besides Chainsaw Man that I'm most invested in at this point. The world, power system, and characters are all so interesting to me, and every single week I'm excited for the episode to drop because I know it's going to be a good time. As I talked about in my video on it, David Productions is clearly putting a lot of love into this series because they were the ones who wanted to do it in the first place. It doesn't have any super flashy scenes that will get it trending on Twitter, but the fights in Undead Unluck have a lot of soul and depth behind them. The power system of negation, taking away something and using it to the user's advantage, is very fun to speculate about when you're meeting a character and don't know their ability. The ever-changing world is captivating, and getting to see the inner workings of it as the episodes go by is something that will always bring me back each Friday. Fuko is also probably one of my favorite main characters from the year, as she's come far away from where she was in the first episode to where we are now. At first, she was scared and alone and wondering who she could trust. Her empathy that she gained from all the years she had to suffer because of her ability would normally feel so cliche, especially in a battle shonen, but it just doesn't apply to any and every character. She finds out who she can relate to and tries to make sure that they know she's a friend to them. Her lack of desire to take lives is something that she can forgo when it's necessary, but also makes sense to have given the weight of the guilt on her shoulders due to the circumstances behind her unluck ability. Andy is also a fun character, partially because he's just a natural Giga Chad, but also because despite his ability being pretty damn broken, all things considered, he doesn't feel that broken at all. He's at the mercy of unknown abilities before him, and even if he does understand how an ability works, it doesn't just mean he wins automatically. He's observant and his analysis skills are up there because of his experience, but he isn't perfect, and it allows for Fuko, despite being so inexperienced, to actually actively take part in the battles instead of just being relegated to the damsel in distress role, as most characters in her position probably would be. It's locked behind Disney and Hulu jail, but in some way, shape, or form, I highly suggest checking out Undead Unluck, even if you aren't too big on battle shonen. I am typically shonen's #1 hater, and I like it, so that's always a good sign, and honestly, if we were further along at the time of writing this, I could see it going even higher on the list. Despite this definitely being the weakest season of Mushoku so far, for a multitude of reasons, I still think it gave a pretty strong product in return. Character drama was the name of the game this season, not that it wasn't a big part of the other seasons as well, but it took up pretty much every bit of time in this one. I have to admit that personally, I was pretty disappointed with how the first few episodes played out in terms of production. Besides the spotty animation, more importantly to me, the pacing of especially episode 2 did not feel right at all. The volume it adapted was certainly less important than what came afterward, and it was certainly there to catch us up and give us a new conflict, but Season 1 set a high bar for expectations. Moving on to the good though, despite how goofy it seems on the surface level, I think Rudeus's condition is actually pretty interesting to see in writing. It's a real thing, and normally you would never really see something like that in media, but Mushoku is basically the perfect place for it to test the waters per se. World building played a large part as well, despite the majority of the season taking place in the same general area. It did get the anime into some controversy on the topic of slavery and Isekai Classic, but we were also introduced to the Demon Lord, and one of the most important bits of information we've gotten thus far with the reveal of Nanahoshi Shizuka. It was also good to see more of Sylphia. She was by far the most underdeveloped character of the main 3 girls we care for in the cast, and her relationship with Rudeus is sure to be a treat to watch develop even further as we get part 2 in April. This season certainly wasn't perfect by any means, but the strength of the writing was able to hold enough weight to outdo the noticeable drop in production quality as the series lost many staff members to other projects like Onimai and Idolmaster. This one holds a soft spot in my heart as it's currently my highest viewed video by a considerably wide margin. Even if it wasn't though, the actual quality of Danmachi this season does more than enough to earn its position on this list. I fully stand by what I said in my video as the quality increase for the series in recent seasons is something I didn't expect but fully welcome. This is about part 2 specifically, but it was well set up by part 1 to allow for this to flourish. Danmachi in season 3 broke the mold of being viewed as a generic fantasy harem, and that continues into the 4th. Both Belle and the entire supporting cast all get their moments of growth during what is probably the most serious arc to date in the anime. Plenty of people rushed to my comments to tell me that the adaptation for previous seasons hadn't been as good as what we got with this one, so I'm hoping that trend continues going forward into Danmachi 5, which got a confirmation of production. Danmachi seriously gets overlooked as a series these days by the general anime community, and because I took so long to write this script, I now know that it did not make the best fantasy for Crunchyroll Anime Awards, and that is an absolute travesty, because what is Demon Slayer doing there again? Anyway, Danmachi doesn't need some goofy award nomination to justify just how good it was this past season. The stakes had never been higher, and if at any point you drop Danmachi, I'd suggest giving it another shot with the elevation of what's been going on recently. It's nice to have something new to write about here because I had done videos on the previous 4 anime and 5 of the last 6, but Apothecary Diaries is something that I hadn't touched on yet, but have really enjoyed. When the anime first came out in the fall season, I wasn't quite as quick to hop on the peak train along with everyone else, but as the core went on, I found myself getting more and more invested in what was happening. The animation and soundtrack were always great from the start, but as I got more attached to the characters, I also became more invested in the politics that surround them and the setting at hand. It's nice to see something different from the typical Japanese setting, so having this Chinese royal circle at the center stage is also something that keeps me interested as it goes on. Mao Mao as the main character is also interesting as we get to see her one-track mindset in regards to studying different medicines and poisons has allowed her to become quite astute in certain situations, but it doesn't make her some sort of genius detective. She makes a lot of assumptions, and while she does tend to backtrack and stop herself from jumping the gun, it is human to want to make those types of leaks. We also see in the second core that her intelligence doesn't automatically translate to everything else, and that it mostly pertains to things that she's actually interested in. The supporting cast has been enjoyable as well thus far, though I guess Jinchi is closer to main than support. His relationship with Mao Mao and the dynamic between the two of them always keeps me on my toes because you're either going to get a fun comedic moment between two people who fail at properly communicating with each other, or an interesting development to one of their characters. With how the anime has been lately, I'm sure my interest will only continue to grow, and I'm super excited to see where it takes us as we approach the end. The anime is going to have a big stage at Anime Japan 2024, and its panel is set right before the finale of Season 1, so I'm hoping and coping that we get a second season announcement there because the sale's been absolutely popping for the series. And back we go to writing about things I already made a video on. Heavenly Delusion is a truly unique experience with every single episode having a different feel to it than the last, with stellar directing throughout the entire thing. One of the reasons I loved the first season of 86 so much when that aired was the way that they play with the dual perspectives of Shin and Lena. So to have Heavenly Delusion playing around with the dual perspectives of the facility and the outside world was something I was always enamored with from the beginning. Anytime you get the answers to questions in this show, it's like 2 more pop up in its place and the train just keeps going. The production quality was especially great, and I absolutely adored what they did with the backgrounds and how they simulated lighting on top of the drawings that they made. It created such an authentic experience watching our 2 main characters traveling throughout this post-apocalyptic world. Speaking of, the banter and relationship between the 2 of them never got old and made following them around that much more enjoyable. The support that they provide to each other felt natural, as did the growth in the dynamics between them. Even outside of those 2, the characters that they meet and the ones inside the facility were also interesting. Seeing all the facility kids slowly develop their desires for independence, questioning what was around them, and starting to figure out love on their own despite the pushback against them was truly fascinating. There were multiple episodes in the anime that I would have considered for episode of the year, and both of them have such a different feel. One is episode 8 with its very slow-paced farewell focus, and the other is episode 10 with it being more quickly paced and also having a bit of comedy that was animated in different styles than the rest of the episode. All of that culminated into the harrowing end that awaited the final bit of the episode. If I'm to believe the leaks, I do. Then season 2 has already gotten the green light, and even though it may be a while before we actually get to see it, I'm very intrigued to see where we go from here. Oshinoko is an anime that had a bit of division after its record-breaking start, where the community had to decide if they were fine with the story not constantly being in thriller mode, or if what they wanted was another rush like they got in the first episode. The manga is my personal favorite, and although a few more banger medalist chapters may change that, it's still going to hold a place in my heart as a story and group of characters that I've been enamored with. As you can tell, I was part of the group that didn't mind not constantly having a thriller on my hands. The building of the different characters at different speeds through different means in the entertainment industry has had me hooked, and the anime made me fall in love all over again. Taking the plunge with the hour-and-a-half long first episode was a perfect direction choice, and from the moment they announced their intentions with it, I knew that the anime was likely going to explode, though I never expected it to the degree that it did. Idol became a worldwide hit as an opening theme, the ending was a banger too, and my personal ending of the year, and the show itself had the content to keep the train going. The anime knew the moments to emphasize, and every single episode went above and beyond to portray the material. Things that barely had any relevance in the source, like Kana's bell pepper exercises and Full Moon song, got tons of love in the episode, and it lets you know that the production team was more than ready to bring the source material to life and exceed expectations set for them. Oshinoko was so prevalent that kids in Japan got Ai Hoshino listed as number 3 on a list of people that they really look up to. Really. Above fathers, even. They're at number 8. A work of love from the start to finish, and a character drama that I always find myself engrossed in. It's no surprise that it would end up this high on the list. While I do think that Jujutsu Kaisen does lack a bit in the story and character department, I'm also not blind, so I can tell a work of art when I see one. Elephant in the room, obviously what MAPPA does to their workers is awful, and while the entire industry is guilty of similar treatment, we should still show love to the work that the animators pour their soul into. Jujutsu Kaisen is a fun show, and while once again it doesn't particularly strike as a strong story or character building series, this season does make more of an effort than any previous in my opinion. Hidden Inventory is an interesting look at the past of Gojo and what happened with Geto to turn him from a special grade sorcerer at Jujutsu High guy into someone obsessed with practically destroying the world. Isolation from Gojo reaching a new level of power and guilt from the situation with Riko drives him into a corner, only for Yuki to then practically give him a direction to go in that she couldn't have possibly known would actually occur. Shibuya's portion mainly focuses on the character of Yuji, and I do think that this arc could have been saved for a bit later so that we could potentially be more attached to certain characters that fight in the arc, but I also see the need to move Yuji forward as a character. His entire worldview is completely shattered in this arc, and surrounding that growth is all the jaw-dropping fights that we got to experience. All sorts of different artistic viewpoints came together in this anime to create the ultimate action experience. The animation didn't reach its fullest potential, but it still looked incredible in almost every single episode. We had smaller scale fights that would have been the best fight in the series for plenty of battle-focused anime, and it was an absolute spectacle to behold. Generally, I look to hold writing quality at the top of the to-do list for anything that tries to take itself seriously, but here I'm ignoring some of the problems that I would have in order to praise what was accomplished in the season. It's a worldwide phenomenon at this point, with everyone talking about it, and some people doing a little more than talking. Utterly terrified to even mention the name Frieren at this point because of what happened when I made my full Frieren video, but I'm going to be really stingy about footage this time, so surely they won't copyright claim me 10 million times again. I love fantasy as a genre, and Frieren is a good example of what I love about it. The production quality in tandem with the ever-expanding world that we get to explore as we follow Frieren on her journey to the land where souls rest just makes for an ethereal experience. No single episode feels the need to focus too heavily on one certain aspect and allows the characters to just go about their journey. Stakes can be high, and some episodes can be as simple as we need to not die in the winter. This is probably the first anime ever where I've watched it and don't get annoyed with all the constant flashbacks because they are built in a way that's believable and truly feels like they matter as we move forward. The character interactions in the past and present are a joy, and even characters we don't know for very long can invoke a feeling of emotion in you because the anime isn't trying to make you feel super bad for someone you just met, but simply going along in a natural way and trying to tie it back to characters we do care about more than others. Old Man Vol is the best example of this in my opinion. We only know him for half an episode, but his connection to Frieren and her realization that he is starting to suffer losses to his memory is something that hits harder because we know he matters to her, and we can also feel sympathy towards him. The anime doesn't make it some big dramatic moment and try to force it down your throat. It happens, gets partially acknowledged, and we move on, because that's all we can do. It's a glorious anime that I'm glad got the love that it did, and I'm excited to start reading it after the anime finishes up. I'm honestly surprised I didn't end up making a Vinland Saga video, because I mean, here we are, number 1 on the list, and I didn't do anything with it. This season was kind of funny because I have messages from the first core questioning how invested I was, because it felt very up and down every episode. But then the second core hit. I never cared for the action in Vinland Saga, as I actually felt it took me out of being immersed with how over the top it was, so this season being different was completely fine to me. The farm arc sat me down and just told me to wait, and damn it did it work. The name of the game in Core 2 was Payoff. Everything that had been slowly building up through the first half exploded onto the scene as the drama ramped up, and so did the stakes. The new cast of characters felt fleshed out and real. Thorfinn became a real character, and for the first time in a long time actually felt like the lead. Obviously, he was a one-note character in the prologue for a reason, but seeing everything that had been building up over the course of not just the second season, but even going back to the first just made for such a great experience. Build up and payoff is the greatest way to satisfy a viewer, and when you do it effectively, you strike gold. Even changing studios, the quality for Vinland stays, and even increases in some places. The soundtrack stays gorgeous, and the voice acting was top of the line. This is a story that unapologetically changed everything, and even if some people were bummed about the loss of monkey action, it made the right choice. From the glorification of violence to speaking out against it in a powerful way, the patient yet effective storytelling of Vinland Saga lands it at the very top of my list for 2023. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed, make sure to hit and like, subscribe, and comment down below what you believe to be the top anime of 2023. There were plenty of anime that I loved and just didn't quite make the cut, so I'm interested to see if any of them landed on other people's lists, and maybe there are some anime out there I didn't watch and should put on my planning. So once again, thank you, and I hope to see you in another video. Goodbye.